Because of Attorney General Barr, his report is public, and his findings are very clear. No collusion and no obstruction. This is the bottom line of the Mueller report. But Mr. Speaker, Democrats refuse to accept it. Mr. Speaker, even the chairman of the committee refuses to go read the portion that he's allowed to read, only 6 lines. He refuses to read it, but he wants to come here today. They continue to believe their worst conspiracy theories about the president, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Mr. Speaker, it's even reported in newspapers in the campaign to become chairman of the Judiciary Committee, one said he campaigned for the position because he would be the best with impeachment. Mr. Speaker, even on this floor of this House, there were more than 60 members of the other side of the aisle who voted for impeachment before the Mueller report was ever presented to the public. At its core, House Res 430 is just a desperate attempt to relitigate the Mueller investigation. That's why I urge colleagues to oppose this resolution. It does not strengthen Congress' oversight powers, contrary to what you may hear from the other side, Mr. Speaker. Fundamentally, it is an impeachment effort in everything but name. Mr. Speaker, just look at the unnecessary contempt citation against Attorney General Barr. Less than a month after Barr received the Mueller report, Mr. Speaker, Chairman Nadler issued a subpoena that would have required the Attorney General of the United States of America to break the law. That's not my opinion. Let's be very clear whose words those are. Jonathan Turley. Mr. Speaker, probably everybody in this body not only knows who Jonathan Turley is, he has probably the utmost respect. He is one of the most respected legal scholars in this country. Now, he told the committee, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "You have to tie your request carefully to your authority to demand information. If Bill Barr had actually compiled with the subpoena as written, he would have violated federal law. If he would have complied, he would have violated federal law." Mr. Speaker, that's why we're here. Not only, Mr. Speaker, does the chairman of that committee ask the Attorney General to break the law or he will try to hold him in contempt, he won't even go read the report. On May 8th, only a few weeks after the first subpoena was issued, House Judiciary Democrats voted to hold A.G. Barr in contempt, the Attorney General of the United States in contempt. Why would they vote to hold him in contempt? Because they were so angry that the Attorney General wouldn't break the law. They wanted him to break the law, then he won't be held in contempt. In a May 24th letter to the Attorney General, Chairman Nadler offered for the first time to negotiate and narrow the scope of his subpoena request. But then you know what? He changed his mind. Yesterday, the Department of Justice reached an agreement with the Judiciary Committee to turn over documents related to the Mueller report. Now, if the public's watching, this just looks so disorganized. You wonder, from that committee, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't they know better than to ask the Attorney General to break the law? Mr. Speaker, wouldn't you know that when you get to this point in a career, that you wouldn't be so upset that someone just doesn't do exactly what you want and then you ask you to break the law, that you'd vote to hold them in contempt and force your side of the aisle just to vote that way? That's not how it's happened in this body before. If the public wants to see a good example of congressional oversight, then let's look at something that's comparable. The House's contempt vote against Attorney General Holder in 2012. The House Oversight Committee took 2 important actions before suing in federal court. First, it negotiated with Attorney General Holder in good faith for 15 months, not a few days. It never asked him to break the law either. Narrowing the scope of its original subpoena, only extensive back and forth negotiations failed, did it vote to hold him in contempt. Second, it got the full House to vote on it and prove, you know what? A bipartisan contempt. Now, I'm not sure why this committee of the judiciary, Mr. Speaker, would not know this, but I did a little research because I was here during that time. You know why they didn't realize it was the best way to do it and it was bipartisan? Because, Mr. Speaker, a lot of them stormed outside of the chambers. Yep, you heard me right. Even though 17 Democrats voted in favor of the criminal contempt resolution against Holder and 21 voted to enforce civil citation, a number of them stormed outside and protested, took their ball and ran home. Mr. Speaker, I guess the public looked at it just throwing another fit. Now that's pretty significant. As many of you remember, it was contentious. I remember, Mr. Speaker, watching then Minority Leader Pelosi, Minority Whip Hoyer, and Congressman Nadler lead 100 Democrats off the House floor to protest the vote. Mr. Speaker, you won't see that on our side. We believe in the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, we would have done the exact same thing the Attorney General did to Jonathan Turley said, that you would have had to break the law to try to appease somebody's own personal vendetta. The idea that, Mr. Speaker, that someone would run for a position to say that they'd be best to impeach somebody and even vote to impeach without even having a report, and then when you get a report and you could go down and read just those 6 lines that you want to complain about, but you won't. The same person, Mr. Speaker, that would run outside and say, I got elected to Congress, but I'm going to pout and I'm going to go outside. Mr. Speaker, that might be the same person that want to bring this to the floor today. But what is so different about today than all the others? Well, we're doing something we've never done before. We're doing something that's going to take the power away of every member in this body and give it to a select few. Mr. Speaker, if this vote passes today, members of this body are going to say, don't bring it here and let me represent my own people and vote about going to court. Let's just give it really to 3 people. Let's give it to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, and to the Majority Whip. Because that's what BLAG is. I know the courts are going to sit there and say, that's not what Congress is supposed to do. Congress has never done that before. But you know what? If this new majority thinks all they want to do is make an attorney general break the law, I guess they could break every rule, every history, every point of representation there is inside this body. Did we wonder if this would happen? Do we wonder why you wouldn't take the months as they've shown in the time before and actually come to a bipartisan conclusion? I think the plan was already written. I don't know if people can talk about the word patient because, Mr. Speaker, I remember Congressman Hank Johnson of the Rules Committee. This is the Speaker's Committee, so everybody understands correctly that it's just appointed by the Speaker on the majority side. And he said, Mr. Speaker, Donald Trump will stand for re-election again in a very short period of time, and we don't have 400 days to wait. So don't care about the rule of law. Don't care about asking him to break the law. Just break every historical trend and try to take the power away from millions of Americans, of the members of Congress who represent him here. I didn't know today would come. Mr. Speaker, I didn't know that someone would go this far. I didn't know just because someone, Mr. Speaker, despises somebody else, that an election didn't turn out the way of the desire. Mr. Speaker, I've been on losing sides before, but I'd never think I'd break the law just because you lost an election. I'd never think of asking somebody as high as office as the Attorney General of the United States of America, to not give due process, to come to the floor and strip the power of 430 members and put it in a select few. But, Mr. Speaker, I have to be honest. I don't put anything past what this new desire is about. Mr. Speaker, Democrats say we're on a constitutional crisis, and they're right. But not because of Attorney General Barr. The true constitutional crisis is this. When Democrats can't win, they change the rules. I just heard it on the floor, Mr. Speaker. That yes, from the other side of the aisle said this has never been done before. And yes, this is nothing this House has ever desired to do. But it's also no way to govern. The American people deserve a majority that is serious about coming up with solutions, not subpoenas. There are plenty of important challenges that we can be working on to solve. Just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I opened the New York Times. It's not a paper that I think always I agree with, but it had an editorial, not for the first time, but for the second time. And it was talking about the crisis on the border. And as I read this editorial, I found myself agreeing with it greatly. When I read it, it talked about the border, it talked about Washington to stop dithering and do something about it. And I looked to wonder what committee would be most responsible for this challenge. Lo and behold, it was Judiciary. So I turned it on in hopes that I would see a hearing. Maybe I'd even see a markup. No, Mr. Speaker, who did I see? I saw John Dean. John Dean, who pleaded guilty in Watergate, the same individuals that's put more than 900 tweets out against the president, many before any Mueller report came forth. He was the expert witness. The same individual who's paid by CNN, the same individual who said the presidency of George Bush was worse than Watergate. I guess this new majority will go to no end. It doesn't matter if the facts don't go where you want, just change the rules. I wonder, all these new freshman Democrats, Mr. Speaker, when they swore in to uphold the Constitution, does that mean trying to make the Attorney General break the law? Does that mean giving your power away to a select few? There is a crisis on the border. The New York Times knows it. The country of Mexico knows it. I think almost everybody in America knows it, except, Mr. Speaker, I guess this majority. The Committee of Responsibility is more concerned about bringing somebody in who pleaded guilty in Watergate, who makes their money off, Mr. Speaker, of writing books claiming every Republican president there is worse than Watergate, and then asking the Attorney General to break the law. That's not a legacy I would be proud of. It's not a legacy I'd want to be a part of. But, Mr. Speaker, I will stay on this floor. I will vote against taking the power away, even the power away from people on the other side of the aisle. I won't lead a protest, and I won't go outside, and I won't take my ball, and I won't run home. I believe in the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, I had the responsibility and the opportunity that I could go read the redacted portions of the Mueller report, just as some on the other side of the aisle could. It's just 6 lines. Not did I think it was just my responsibility, but as an elected official, I thought it was a responsibility, so I went. But, Mr. Speaker, the people leading this today, they have not. They think they know better. I don't know if they know better, but one thing I do know, they're changing the rules of the House simply because they cannot win. That's not the American way. Those are the reasons why we stand up. Those are the things that America unites behind, the rule of law. This will not be a day that's proud. This will not be a day that when they look back in history, the individuals who vote for this will talk about. It's one when they get asked a question later in life, Mr. Speaker, is there something they regret? They'll regret the emotion overtook them. They regret their own personal dislike drove them. I'm not sure if they're proud of the day when they storm out of the building, even though there's a bipartisan vote here. But I guess that same emotion, the same, Mr. Speaker, lack of ability to actually look at the rule of law and work towards something instead of just changing the rules because you can't have your way, that's what today's about. But the worst part of it all is removing the power of individual members and putting in a select three. But then again, Mr. Speaker, when you study history and forms of government, that's what socialism is all about. I yield back.